gap of the Quebec from acid rain. That's the cost of coal. 2 hours from where I live, the Adirondack Mountains, where I take my kids fishing and hunting and swimming and kayaking and skiing and camping, 1 out of every 5 of the lakes in the Adirondacks is sterilized from acid rain. That's one of the costs of coal. And you can go on and on. You know, the costs also include terrible political corruption that we saw during the Bush administration. You know, Joe Lovett, Kentucky Institute of Commonwealth, a good friend of ours, sued the coal industry because, you know, when I flew over, let me tell you this, when I flew over, I flew out of West Virginia and I flew over the Cumberland, and I saw something that if the American people could see it, there'd be a revolution in this country. We are cutting down the Appalachian Mountains, literally. These giant machines called drag lines, some of them are 22-story high. I flew under one of them in a Piper Cub. They cost $500 million for one machine, and they practically dispense with the need for human labor. And when my father, and that indeed is the point, when my father was fighting strip mining in Appalachia back in the 60s, I remember a conversation I had with him when I was 14 years old. And strip mining then was very small compared to now, but he was fighting it because he saw the evil in it. He said to me, they're not just destroying the environment. He said they're not just destroying the environment, they're permanently impoverishing these communities. Because there's no way. Right. There's no way that you can regenerate an economy from these barren moonscapes that are left behind. And he said they're doing it so they can break the union. And that's exactly what they did. When he told me that there were 46,000 unionized mine workers in West Virginia alone, taking coal out of tunnels in the ground. Today, there are fewer than 11,000 miners left in the state. Walmart employs more people. Only half of them are unionized. And because the strip industry isn't. And they're taking more coal out of West Virginia each year than they were in 1968. The only difference is back then, at least some of that money was being left in the state for salaries and pension and reinvestment in the communities. Today, virtually all of it goes straight up to Wall Street, to the banking houses like Morgan and Bank of America and Citibank that own these operations. And 95% of the coal in West Virginia is owned by out-of-state interests, where the corporate headquarters of Magic Coal, Peabody Coal, and Arch Coal. And it's not staying in the state of West Virginia. And these companies are literally liquidating the state for cash, using these giant machines and 2,500 tons of ammonium nitrate explosives they detonate every day in the state. It's the equivalent, just in West Virginia, not eastern Kentucky, of a Hiroshima bomb once a week. They're blowing the tops off the mountains to get at the coal seams beneath, and then they take the rock and debris and rubble and they dump it into the adjacent river valleys. And they bury the streams and the rivers. They've already buried, according to EPA, 2,000 miles of valley streams and American rivers and creeks. They have flattened 1 million acres. They've cut the tops off of 500 mountains. These are the historic landscapes where Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett that are so much a part of American culture and our heritage, and you know, and our bluegrass culture, and all these great things that came out of those mountains. You know, during the Pleistocene ice ages, where my home is today in Mount Kisco, New York, there were 2 miles of ice over that spot. And the rest of North America was in tundra. All the forests disappeared, except in one small refugium, which was the Appalachian Mountains, eastern Kentucky, and West Virginia. It's the only place the forest survived from 20,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. That 12,000 years ago, the glaciers withdrew. And all of North America was reseeded from that seed stock that had survived in the Appalachians. So that is the mother forest of all of North America. And that's why it's the richest forest, the richest ecosystem in the hemisphere, because it's the oldest. It has more life, more abundance, more diversity per cubic meter than any other place in the hemisphere. And today, Magic Coal is accomplishing what the glaciers couldn't accomplish, what the Pleistocene ice age couldn't accomplish, which is to flatten those mountains and to destroy the forest and destroy the life in those mountains. And, you know, it's all against the law. You cannot, in this country, take rock and debris and rubble and dump it into a waterway without a clean water permit. You can never get a permit to do such a thing. So we sued them, and Joe Lovett, the Kentucky Institute of Commonwealth, had the lead case, and he had to argue that case in front of Judge Charles Hayden, a conservative Republican federal judge in West Virginia. And Judge Hayden said even the government agencies that were issuing these phony permits, the Corps of Engineers, the Corps of Criminal Came in and admitted all the permits were illegal. And the judge himself said to the Corps Colonel, how did you start issuing these permits when they're obviously illegal? And he said, I don't know, Your Honor. We just kind of oozed into it. That was his answer. That's a quote. And so Judge Hayden said the same thing I said. He said it's all illegal. It's been illegal since day one. And he enjoined all mountaintop mining. 2 days from when we got that decision, lobbyists for Peabody Coal and Massey Coal met in the back door of the Interior Department with Gale Norton's first deputy chief, Stephen J. Griles, who was a former lobbyist for Massey Coal and Peabody Coal, and who today is serving a 10.5-month jail sentence in the federal penitentiary for 2 lakes in the mountains. And they together rewrote the interpretation of one word of the Clean Water Act, the definition of the word fill, to change 30 years of statutory interpretation and to effectively overrule Judge Hayden's decision and make it legal, as it is today, not just in West Virginia, but Kentucky and all 50 states, to dump rock, debris, rubble, garbage, any solid material into any waterway of the United States without a Clean Water Act permit. All you need today is a rubber stamp permit from the Corps of Engineers, which in some districts they'll give you over the telephone or through the mail. So you lose all the democratic protections, the transparency, the visibility, the capacity to comment, and the standards. They're all gone. It's just a guy in the Corps office who says, fine, go ahead and do it, because I like you. And this is what we're fighting. It's not just the destruction, wherever you see environmental injury, you also see the subversion of democracy. And you go all over West Virginia, and you will see, politicians who have sold their souls to this industry. You'll see judges that literally are elected as to the injury. And Don Blankenship, who was just cited by the Supreme Court of the United States, as bad as they are, had cited that you can't even do what you did, which was to buy your way out of a case by placing a judge on the bench for $3 million of your own money. And you see this political corruption everywhere where this industry is occurring. This is one of the richest states in the United States. Kentucky, your state. If you look at the natural resources, how come you got the poorest people? How come West Virginia was just the richest state? It's the second highest poverty rate, the worst health system in this country, the highest illiteracy rate in the country, the highest diabetes, the highest obesity rate, the poorest communities, the highest unemployment. How can that be when they have more wealth in that state than any other state in this country? It's because democracy is corrupted along with the environment destroyed. And that's the problem with this. I say this, you'll see people argue in Eastern Kentucky and politicians in this state, you'll see them argue, well, this is good for the economy. We have to choose between the economy and the environment. Well, a recent report came out by MASSA, which is a Kentucky organization, a very well-respected organization, in 2009, this year. It shows that the coal industry in Kentucky has imposed a net cost on the state of $156 million a year. Not a benefit, not an economic benefit. And this is true everywhere. Good environmental policy, 100% of the time, is identical to good economic policy. If you want to measure the economy, this is how we are the economy, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generations, over the long term, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what the big moguls and their indentured servants in our political process and their phony mouthpieces, their hand puppets on Fox News would like us to do, which is to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resource to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and make a few people rich, but we're going to make a lot of people poor. And we're going to do that. Our children are going to pay for our joyride. And they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they will never be able to pay. Environmental injury is always going to land most disproportionately on the backs of our children. Environmental injury is deficit spending. It's a way of loading the cost of our generation's prosperity onto the backs of our children. And that's all it is. It's deficit spending. It's a way of, shifting the cost to another generation, to somebody else. It's always about cost shifting. And I want to say this, there's no stronger advocate for free market capitalism than myself. I believe the free market is the most efficient and democratic way to distribute the goods of the land. And the best thing that can happen to the environment is if we have true free market capitalism, because in a true free market, a true free market rewards efficiency. Efficiency, as I said before, means the elimination of waste, and pollution is waste. And a true free market, we would be encouraged to properly value our natural resources and the lives of our community. And it is the undervaluation of those things that causes us to use them wastefully, the way that we are doing with coal. Now, and in a true free market economy, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering the quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs. That's what all pollution is. It's somebody who is shifting his costs. It's a big shot who said, I can get rich by poisoning somebody else. That's what all pollution is. And all of the federal environmental laws, that were passed after Earth Day 1970 were all designed to restore free market capitalism in this country by forcing polluters to pay the true cost of bringing their products to market. And what I do as an environmental advocate is the water keepers in my group sue polluters. And we don't even consider ourselves environmentalists anymore. We consider ourselves free marketeers. We're out to protect the integrity of America's free market capitalist system. We go out and catch the cheaters, the polluters. We say to them, we're going to force you to internalize your costs the same way that you internalize your profits. Because as long as you're passing the profits on to somebody else, it distorts the marketplace, and none of us get the values of the democracy and the prosperity that are promised by true free market capitalism. And in a true free market, we have to understand our country the difference between free market capitalism, which makes a nation more efficient, more prosperous, more democratic, and the kind of corporate crony capitalism, which is embraced in so many states and all around coal country, which is as antithetical to democracy, to efficiency, to prosperity in America as it is in Nigeria. Now, I want to say this on the hopeful side, which is, I told you that one of my companies is building a plant, a solar thermal plant in the California desert. And it's the first of many. There's 30 companies now building these plants. Mine is the biggest, 2.6 gigawatts an hour. We're burning it. We're building it at the same price you can build a coal plant. But once we build it, the energy's free forever. Once you build the coal plant, the big costs, I just said, just start. Once you build this plant, the infrastructure's there. The sunlight is hitting us every day for free. All we have to do is pick up the photons and send them through the line. Harvest them. And when we build that harvesting infrastructure, we create something that's now free forever. And we use 1,000 gigawatts a year. 500 of those are carbon-based. It costs about $3 million a gigawatt to build a solar thermal plant or a wind farm. So we can replace all of our carbon power in this country for about 1.3 or 1.5 trillion dollars. That's about half of what we're going to pay for the war in Iraq. And once we do that, we have free energy forever. Free energy forever. And we've done this before. in 1979, we built an ARPANET grid in this country, a national marketplace for the internet. And a year later, in 1980, there were fewer than 500 networks in this country, computer networks, and IBM said that PCs, personal computers, were a dead-end technology. Okay, well today, probably most everybody in this room has a PC. And what happened to the cost of information, of bits and bytes? It plummeted to almost zero. And that's what's going to happen to electrons as soon as we build a national marketplace for electricity in this country. And by the way, all we have to do is build the grid. That's all the government has to do in the utilities, because once you build it, this 1.5 trillion will all be supplied by private entrepreneurs like my company, like Vantage Point, like BrightSource, like Siemens, Vestas, GE. We all want to build these things. We're fighting to build them. So we want to build them with our own money. But all we got to do is build that grid, and all of this is going to happen. We did this again in 1996. Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, which went out and said we're going to create a national grid for telecommunications in this country. He told all the baby bells you can no longer restrict access to your line. You have to let everybody who wants to sell communications product to get onto your line. The lowest cost producer or provider is going to, win the battle. And what happened? We had a telecommunications revolution in this country immediately. And all of these little gadgets that you have, like iPhones, are the offspring of that revolution. But before I left New York yesterday, I saw an ad on TV by a company called Vonage that promises 100% of overseas, local, and long-distance telephone for 1 year for $19. Okay, that's practically free. Many of us have paid $19 for a single phone call in the last year or two. But we're talking the future, $19 for an entire year of unlimited telephone service. It's free telecommunications forever. The same thing will happen to our energy system as soon as we build a national grid for energy. So what Obama's plan is to build this national grid. And then what happens? I'll tell you what's going to happen. It's the same thing. In 1929, in October, just before the stock market crashed, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was at 385 points. In 1942, 13 years later, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was at 85 points. So over that 13 years, there's been no economic recovery. Franklin Roosevelt, through the New Deal, kept millions of Americans alive and fed and housed and working. But there was no broader economic recovery. There just wasn't a stimulus package that was big enough to do it. But then World War II happened. And Franklin Roosevelt made a famous speech to the American people where he said, we are going to build 50,000 airplanes a year. He got the number out of thin air. He just made it up. The year before, there had been 2,800 built. He said, we're going to build 50,000. We're going to build 25,000 tanks. We're going to build a ship a day. And on and on and on. Munitions, etc. And people laughed at him. They said, no industrial mobilization of this kind has ever happened in history. But he went to Detroit, and within 6 weeks, they retooled their plans to make tanks and half-tracks and amphibious vehicles and jeeps and planes, Mustang fighters and bombers. And he had full employment. 140,000 black and women went to Detroit where they'd been blackballed 6 months before and found jobs, and 19-year-old kids. Everyone that got out of high school was sent over to fly these big planes. There was full employment in our country and a complete, massive economic stimulus package. And what happened? The stock market, we had full employment, the stock market recovered and exploded. But during World War II, and then we had a long recovery that lasted for